You can help support the channel by heading to our merchandise store and picking up some of our great aircraft designs created by our graphic designer. We have everything from fighters to transport aircraft, which you can choose to have printed on t-shirts, mugs, stickers and much more. Head to the description below and click the links and pick up your design today. Thank you and enjoy. Scott, when did you first become interested in aviation?
Oh my goodness. It goes back to when I was probably 7 or 8 years old. And my dad bought me a Lysander airfix kit. Um, and today, the Lysander, even today, is an aircraft which I have a massive passion for, particularly the SOE version, which was the airfix kit. And that kind of fueled my passion in aviation. And my dad kept pushing me down that road and pushing me down that road. And we lived in Dundee, so we had RAF Lookers, as was then very nearby, which had a massive air day every September. And I used to go there with my dad, loved that. I'd buy posters, models, you name it, all hanging from my walls and roof. And, I was a proper AV geek even from a really young age.
Brilliant stuff. So, did you always want to join the RAF? And could you tell us actually what year you joined?
Yeah, so when I came to the end of my schooling in Dundee, I had two career choices really. One was policing, and the other was the RAF, and I applied for both. Um, Ended up getting an answer from the police before I did the RAF, and actually ended up going to the police force first. Then I got an offer from the RAF to join in 1990 as an air loadmaster, not as a pilot as I'd applied for. It was a bit of a disappointment, but actually, they said they didn't think I was mature enough to be an officer or a pilot, and actually they were probably right looking back on it. So I joined in 1990 as senior NCO aircrew, sergeant aircrew in the loadmaster branch.
Yeah, so before we get onto the Herc part, could you tell us a bit about the job of a loadmaster? Because it does sound like a really great job.
Yeah, it's an amazing job. Back then, there were really two or three routes that you could use as a loadmaster. So loadmaster were helicopter crewmen, and that's the person who's either in the back of the helicopter, moving the stuff around and doing the winching if it's a SAR helicopter, or you could be a fixed wing loadmaster and you would work on either the Hercules, the TriStar in my time, or the VC-10. It's now the Voyager. And you would be a bit more, particularly in the, as they would call it, the shiny fleet, the VC-10 and the TriStar, a bit more like a chief flight attendant. But actually, on the Hercules, you were responsible for airdropping of loads, dispatching of parachutists, all sorts of things. So it's a really broad job that encompassed everything from making sure the weight and balance of the aircraft was right for the captain to making the tea.
Wow, yeah, so a very diverse role there. So then, obviously, you went on to be a pilot. How did this come about? Did you apply for the role, or did someone say, Scott, I think you'd be right to be a pilot?
So a bit of both, really. I applied for the role for the two times once I was in the Air Force. The first time I got knocked back, and then the second time I thought I got knocked back, as you probably find out in the book, and then found out actually by surprise that I'd been accepted. And that was roughly, it was my last time really that I could have applied. Because back then, beyond sort of 26, 27 years of age, you couldn't apply to become an RAF pilot. So I was about on my last chance saloon, and I found out that I'd been successful.
And was that quite a common route, or was that quite a unique way to go to be a pilot?
No, it's a lot more common than you'd think. A lot of NCO aircrew, non-commissioned aircrew, and navigators swap over to be pilots. And during my time, I have at least four or five friends who started out with me as loadmasters, who've subsequently become pilots in the Air Force.
So did you always want to go on to the Herc then? Because, I mean, it's iconic, but did you always have that in your back of your mind? That's the route you wanted to go on to if you were going to become a pilot?
No. I wanted to be a search and rescue helicopter winchman,
Oh wow,
um,
really? Wow.
which which actually now with my I have an aversion, a very famous aversion to helicopters, might surprise a lot of people. But actually, no, that's where it all started because RAF Lucas had a search and rescue Wessex as it was then. And I joined the Air Cadets and I went on a number of camps and I got some time, spent some time in the Sea King at RAF Lossiemouth, which I thought this was great. What a job. This is what I want to do. And then, oh my goodness, I, by hook or by crook, ended up starting off on a Chinook course. And then, due to a change of priorities, I ended up on the Herc. So it was almost by accident, but actually, it was the start of a very long 18-year love affair with that airplane.
Absolutely. And if some of our viewers, they probably will be, but are not familiar with the Herc, what's the role of it? Because it seems like quite a diverse aircraft in terms of what it can do.
Was originally designed back in the late 60s as a tactical air transporter. And,
Hmm.
what does that mean? Well, it was designed to take heavy loads short distances. When the Air Force got it in the 70s, they decided that actually this was going to be a strategic airlift capability. So it would be inter theatre, so it would take stuff from the UK to the Middle East or wherever. And they never really envisaged it back then as a battlefield tool, i.e., be going beyond the forward line of their operating troops as a tactical asset. But then along came the Falklands War and some other skirmishes, which we talk about in the book. And actually, that changed quite rapidly. And the Hercules was then seen as a tool to go and do some war fighting. And what we saw done elsewhere, in particular in Tebby, where it was used to rescue the hostages in Tebby, and in Vietnam, and how it was used in Vietnam, actually completely changed how the Hercules was viewed as an airborne tool, and it really, as important today as it was back then. And if we look back as far as World War II, the Dakota was the mainstay of everything. They said it was a jeep with wings. I think actually now the Hercules is the replacement for the Dakota, and it's endured. I mean, we're in the record-breaking 70th year of production of the Hercules this year. So they must have got something right back then.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a crazy time frame. But going to a bit of the nitty gritty here, Scott, like how did you find your ground and flying training? Were you a natural at it, or did you really have to work? Because I talked to some people and it's just like, yeah, it was easy, if you know what I mean. And some say I really struggle. But what was it like for you?
Oh my goodness, I'm not a natural pilot. I'm not a gifted pilot. I wish I was. I fly with a lot of people who are gifted, and in the book there are stories from people who are at the pinnacle of air transport and being able to do stuff with this airplane. I'm distinctly average and have to work very hard to be distinctly average. But it is hard work. Pilot training is tough, and Air Force pilot training, Royal Air Force pilot training, is renowned to be some of the toughest in the world. And yeah, it was hard. It was hard, particularly with a young family. I had a very young family at the time, and it was really hard to balance family life with going through that training because I was a little bit older than the others on my course, who were all predominantly all single. It makes a different dynamic for that, which has adds challenges to the training that perhaps some others didn't have. But I got through, ended up going to the HERC, which is fantastic, and as I say, almost a 20-year love affair started.
Absolutely. And could you tell our viewers what the Herc or did well or does well, and what did it do not so well?
Oh my goodness, it does a lot of things really well. The thing that it does amazingly well, and I don't think there is anything to match this, is its tactical air landing capability. I mean, this airplane can land on literally a postage stamp in someone's back garden. In fact, the only airplane of its size ever to land on an aircraft carrier. Not once, but 22 times it landed on the USS Forrestal, at 70 tons. And it stopped shorter than an arrested F 18. without. So obviously it didn't have arrestor gear,
Yeah.
and it stopped in, I think it was 680 feet. Those numbers might be wrong, but it's pretty short, and it was much shorter than the arrested F-18. So actually, it's such a capable airplane. So short landings, taking cool things into short strips, it is amazing. Airdrop, the ability to drop boats, people, uh, tanks, fuel bowsers, fuel bladders, anything like that. It can do all of that. The thing it didn't do well, it didn't go very fast, and that was both a blessing and a curse. So a blessing in that it didn't go very far. So you had to do lots of stops, and that sometimes meant you get to stop in some nice places. But also, it meant when you were doing, inter-theater stuff, that the flights were pretty long. So yeah, the only thing it doesn't do really well is go very fast. It's not a VC-10 TriStar or an A330, which is doing Mach point 0.8 or faster. This thing is sitting back at about point 0.6, 0.55, something like that. So it's pretty slow.
But can you remember being on your first squadron, and what was that like, being on your first frontline squadron?
Well, I spent most of my time on the Hercules, both as a loadmaster and as a co-pilot and captain on 47 Squadron. I have a great affinity with that squadron, very famous squadron. It's done some amazing things, one of the most highly decorated squadrons in the Royal Air Force. So yeah, the turning up first day on that squadron is very daunting. But very quickly you become part of the family, and in the book we talk about how that family looks after each other, and how they look after each other when sadly things don't go so well.
And did you ever fly on large exercises, like the European nation exercises over there or anything like that? And what was that like mixing with other nations?
Oh, it's amazing. And I think the biggest one I did was in the US. I can't remember the name of it now, but we were based at Pope Air Force Base. And I don't know if you've ever seen Pope Air Force Base pictures of it, but it's just literally lines and lines of Hercs. And we turned up there with our contingent of half a dozen Hercs, and we had an amazing time flying with literally hundreds of other aircraft information. And it's great because that interoperability that we train for during these exercises, inevitably, we end up using some of that when we work tactically in environments like Iraq and Afghanistan.
And did you ever swap notes with the other nations? Did everyone do it generally the same, or be like, oh, well, they did it this way, maybe we can do it a bit better, or anything like that?
Yeah, I think we tended to be a bit more mantronic,
Right.
because we didn't have what we would call all the Gucci kit on our hacks, to begin with, certainly. And I think the Americans had a huge reliance on GPS and moving map and all this kind of thing, which we had a great reliance on the Mark One eyeball and the paper map, which again has its advantages and disadvantages. But yeah, I think in the way that we operated the aeroplane was generally the same. Generally the same, I would say. Just we dropped different things out the back, because the Americans used a different system for dropping containers as we did. Ours was far more Heath Robinson and involved bits of string and bungees, and theirs was a bit more automated. But apart from that, the actual operation of the aircraft was very, very similar.
I'm guessing you flown in, live theatre or in conflicts. What was that like, and did you feel prepared for that kind of environment?
Yeah, I mean, I'll use Afghanistan as an example. I was the captain on a single aircraft detachment in Afghanistan for a number of times, and you feel there that actually you are the lifeline for a lot of the troops who are remotely away from the main operating bases. And we can drop them stores, we can take the relief crews there, we can do air medical evacuation in the Herc. And over long distances, it's an amazing aircraft to do that. And I certainly felt prepared going there. I mean, the environment in Afghanistan, we trained for that in California, of all places, because actually the terrain and the mountainous terrain in Southern California is very similar to that in Afghanistan. And it really does show the limitations of operating the aircraft at altitude, which is a big difference for the Herc. It does run out of power in hot days at high altitude. So it's something that you do have to be aware of. But yeah, I felt hugely prepared before we went there, and came back successfully with no losses, which is always a good place to be.
And actually, what models did you fly of the Her? Because I know there's quite a few out there, but what models did you personally fly?
So the Air Force, Royal Air Force, flew the E model, which the RAF designated the K, just to make
Yeah.
it really difficult. So yeah, the E model, which was the most popular in the USAF, is the K in RAF parlance. And that was the aircraft that the Air Force had the most of. We had over 50 of those at its peak. And then that was replaced by the J model, which is the J across the board. And the Air Force had two variants of that. They had the short and the long variant. I flew the K model as a loadmaster and a captain. And then for a very short period, I assisted in training in the J model, but I never flew the aircraft. That was just in the simulator.
I'm sure you've got plenty here, Scott, but maybe a few stories that stick out in your mind from flying the Hercules.
Oh my goodness, far too many stories to tell. I think the ones that stick out are actually the ones about people more than anything else, and high jinks. So rather than high tension, which there are lots of across lots of people's careers, I think the ones that stick out for me are the more fun stories. And I remember going on a detachment to Somalia back in the Troubles in the early 90s. And on the way to that detachment, we had to do a stopover in Akrotiri, RAF Akrotiri in Cyprus. And it was just in the run up to Christmas. And, we were pretty hacked off that we were going to be away over Christmas and New Year and miss all the festivities. So a little bit of Dutch courage, helped by Carlsberg. We went into the sergeant's mess and liberated their Christmas tree out of the foyer, which was about 9 feet tall. It was all decorated. And we stuck this in the aeroplane and took it all the way down to Kenya with us. And it sat outside the detachment for 9 weeks.
Oh.
And we got into some trouble for that because apparently somebody saw us loading it in the morning and said, "Oh, I wonder where they got that Christmas tree from." 2 or 3 days later, we get a little telex saying, "Thanks very much, you're going to have to pay for the Christmas tree." So those are the ones that stick out, really, the really little funny anecdotes around having fun with people, more so than the perhaps more stressful times.
Yeah, and did you enjoy working as a crew as well? Because I'm guessing it changed all the time in terms of how many people were on board.
It did, but as I said, you're a bit like a family. So the crews on the squadron really, you knew each other really, really well. And if you went away for a detachment for a period of time, you would generally work up with that crew before you went. And obviously, you would be together for the whole period of the detachment, whether that be 6 weeks, 8 weeks, however long. So actually, it was like going away with your friends a lot. And not only did you know sort of how you professionally interacted with that individual, you knew that individual's family, you knew their children, and so actually, yeah, it was a really nice environment to work in with crews. It was great.
So talk us through the book, where the idea came from, and everything in between.
So the idea actually came from John Nichol. I'm going to give John Nichol the praise for the idea. So one night I was in the RAF club, and I bumped into John Nichol, and we were with some friends who'd just written a book about something completely different. He'd written a book called Finn's Law, and it was about a police dog who had been attacked and had saved its handler. And we were sitting chatting about that, and John was chatting about his new book, which at the time was Eject to Jet. And he said, why don't you do a book about the Hercules? Nobody's done a book about the Hercules. And I kind of laughed at him and said, I can't speak English most days. How am I going to write it? And he introduced me to this amazing person Lynn Barrett Lee, who's helped me write this book. And I spoke to some friends, Wing Commander Simon Footer, retired Wing Commander, who is kind of the grandfather of the Hercules fleet. And he keeps us all together now that the Hercules has left service. He keeps us together as a group, and we go and do social events and stuff. And I approached Simon and said, look, I'd like to do this book. Do you think we could do something? He said yes, and we decided that, we'd do something and make some money for the RAF Benevolent Fund as well. So some of the money from the book is going to the RAF Benevolent Fund.
That's great stuff. And what can we see in the book? Is it lots of stories, or is it your stories? Or have you got other people coming in?
Oh, it's not my stories. Right. There are a few little snippets from me, kind of blend of the 24, 25 stories that we have in the book together. But those stories come from the early mid-60s all the way up to the final story is a story about a crew going on a mission into Khartoum to rescue the people who were stuck in Khartoum recently in 2023. One of the last missions that the aircraft did before it retired from service. So we've got almost 6 decades of stories there, which I intersperse with a few little anecdotes of my own and pull it together. And we've got some stories from outside of the RAF as well. I think I touched earlier that we talked about the Entebbe raid. The Entebbe raid and saving those hostages was one of the most audacious raids ever carried out by C-130 crews. And I had the privilege of talking to Brigadier General Joshua Shani, who led that raid, planned and led that raid. And we get his thoughts on how he ended up doing it. And I won't give too much away, but I think anyone who reads it will just be absolutely astounded at how they actually managed to do it. And, they saved every single hostage. Every single hostage was saved, and there was only one fatality on the day, who in fact was Benjamin Netanyahu's brother, who was leading the Special Forces team, the Israeli Special Forces team that led the raid. So, a compilation of stories across almost 6 decades, which I think will have something for everyone, from tactical stuff to famine relief to dropping parachutists from 4 or 5 miles up.
Sounds brilliant. And do you think a non-aviation fan, the average person in Waterstones, can pick it up and read it, or is it mainly aimed at aviation community?
No, not at all. I mean, the av geeks will love it. Because it's an aviation book. The central character is an aircraft. The central character of this is the Hercules. It drives through every story. It's in every single story. But the one thing that I think people who are not interested in aviation would be attracted to the book is because it's about people. Mm-hmm. So the plane doesn't go anywhere without people, and it's about this amazing group of people who go way beyond what most people would probably be willing to do to get the job done. And in some cases, we see people doing phenomenal things, feats of human endurance, flying for, over a day in a Hercules, for example, which realistically are amazing and helped us win, in that case, the conflict in the South Atlantic. So I think there's a great people story here, and I think that'll be what attracts the non-aviation fan to this book, is the story of the people inside it.
Absolutely. And where can we find it? I think is it released on the 23rd of May? Is that right, Scott?
So 23rd of May in the UK, slightly later in the US, but due to a quirk with Amazon at the moment, the book is on special on the Amazon UK sites. I mean, we don't control. They've reduced the price, put it on
Right.
special, which means you can buy it in the UK and have it sent anywhere in the world, and it's probably cheaper than the local price. So a bit of a quirk at the moment, but yeah, and you can find it in any good bookstore. You mentioned Waterstones earlier. It'll be available in Waterstones on the 23rd. It's also available to pre-order on their website.
Brilliant stuff. And is it available on Kindle, or is the audio version coming at some point, or are you just seeing how the hardback goes
Both,
first?
both,
Both, right.
both are coming. I haven't read it myself because, as I said, English is almost a second language for my Scottish drawl. So we've had somebody read it, and it is available on audiobook and will be available to pre-order on Kindle as well.
Brilliant stuff. Well, all the links will be in the description there, folks. But we've got a couple of questions from our patrons and then some personal ones to wrap up this interview, if you're happy with that, Scott.
Oh, of course. Let's go.
Right, so this is from Joe Cunler. Does your book cover only RAF Herculeses?
Joe, it doesn't. We predominantly the book is based around 47 Squadron and its exploits as an RAF, but as we've just discussed, we've got some stuff from the IDF in there, the Entebbe raid, but there are some other little stories around, for example, stuff that I've talked about today, the USS Forrestal landing, that was a Navy Herc, flown by an Air Force pilot, and there are some other stuff about Vietnam and lots of other little quirks, but the majority of the book is about RAF service. But there are stories from all over the place, blended in between there.
Stuff. And the last one from here, from Joe, is did you ever get to fly the C-130 in displays? I got a ride in Fat Albert in July 2015, best day of my life.
Oh wow! Wow! I'm really impressed that he's got to fly in Flat Albert. What people might not know is the current Fat Albert for the Blue Angels is an ex-RAF aeroplane.
Oh, really? Right.
Yeah, so that aeroplane was one of the ones that the Air Force disposed of. It went to Marshalls and was repainted and is now the Blue Angels aeroplane. So it started out life as an RAF aeroplane, which is fantastic. And yes, I have flown the Herc and displayed the Herc for some flypasts. The most notable one, I think, was I did a flypast at Fairford, which commemorated the loss of some colleagues that we lost in Iraq. There was a missing man formation flown at Area Fairford, and that was probably one of the most poignant ones for me. But yes, I have flown in displays.
Brilliant stuff. So this is from Golf 75. Would you like to fly the A400?
Goal 75, I secretly have flown it in the sim. So I've had a go in the sim. I now fly an Airbus in my day job. So actually, the A400M architecture and the flight deck is largely based around the A380. So actually, it feels familiar. Sitting in the sim and having a fly of the sim, I would love to have a go. It's an amazing looking airplane, hugely overpowered in comparison to the Herc. And I expect it's a joy to fly at low level with the side stick. So yes, I have had a sneaky go in the sim. 24 Squadron have let me do that, which was fantastic, and we talk a little bit about that in the book at the end.
Did you prefer the camo or the grey schemes on the Herc?
Oh, I'm old school, John. The coolest scheme I thought that we had on the UK Hercs was actually the desert camo, which is how they were delivered. So they were delivered with a camo scheme which was very sandy, which was really old, sort of, and I quite liked that. And we had a few airplanes during the Gulf War that were hand painted by the crews in desert colours. So actually just sand coloured. So actually that one is quite iconic, and there's some photographs online you'll see of that one at over 90 degrees a bank over the desert somewhere. So, those are the colours for me. The grey was a bit drab, and I think camo always looked best on it. But yeah, desert camo for me was the coolest colour of all.
I agree with that one there, Scott. So a couple of, this is a personal one while we wrap up this interview. Yeah, so do you have any hobbies?
Oh my goodness. Aviation is my hobby. I love everything aviation. Uh, People who follow me on social media will see I am a proper av geek. So my hobbies are I do television, aviation television. My latest show is The Last 747, which is out on Paramount Plus. So I produce those shows, and I have done a number. Air Force One, The Flying Fortress is on Disney Plus at the moment. A show I produced and had the privilege of flying on Air Force One a couple of times whilst we filmed that, which was amazing. So my hobby are all sort of tied around aviation and aviation media. I don't really have a proper hobby, if you want to call it that. I don't like cycling or anything like that. You don't get a body like this by cycling. So it's more sitting in the house and doing stuff.
So there's no going out golfing for the whole weekend type thing.
No, that's not me.
Great stuff. I probably know the answer to this one, but favorite aircraft you've flown?
Oh my goodness. Um, it's going to be really tough, and it's probably not what you think. So
Okay.
it's going to be a dead heat, actually. In my early years, I would have said if you'd have asked me that question pre 2008, I'd have said the Hercules hands down. It was the most amazing aircraft to fly. It did what you wanted it to do. From a piloting point of view, it was just amazing. Um, Post 2008, I, for 12 years, flew an Icon. So I flew the 747-400. And I think anyone who's flown the 747 would kind of say that it's tough to beat.
Yeah, I can
Although
imagine.
the C-130 is, iconic in itself, it would be a dead heat for me between the C-130 and the Jumbo. 12 years on the Jumbo, I don't think many people would say, "Wow, I flew the Jumbo jet. It was a bit meh." Yeah,
Yeah.
it wasn't. It
Yeah,
was.
I don't think I've
It
heard
was.
that before.
No, it was amazing to fly the Jumbo jet, and perhaps that might be the next book.
Okay, watch. Little teaser there. One you'd like to fly either past or present?
Oh, this is an easy one. Anybody who follows me on social media will know this. The Lysander. Ever since I made that model, the SOE Lysander has been an airplane I would have loved to fly in or fly. Probably not fly because there's only a couple around the world and they're not going to let me loose on it because I'm distinctly average as a pilot. Um, but a friend of mine, Jim Schofield, flies the Lysander in the UK, and it is a handful. So I don't think I'd want to fly it. But actually, just to fly in the Lysander, that would be for me done. Bucket list done.
Brilliant stuff. And last one to wrap up here, Scott. Where can we find you online? Are you on social media? Do you have a website?
Oh yeah, got a website, scottybateman.com. Social media, I'm on X, is at Scotty Bateman, Instagram at Scotty Bateman underscore. So yeah, I different stuff on different platforms, but I'm sure any aviation related person will like any of the stuff that I put on the platform.
Well, brilliant stuff. All the links will be in the description, folks. But Scott, thank you very much for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
No, it's been great. Thanks for having me, and I hope you enjoy the book.
Absolutely. So, yeah, take care and we'll speak soon.